All right. Good evening, everybody. It is Tuesday, March 28th, 2023, and it's 5 p.m. And you are at a joint meeting between the Finance Committee and the Wausau Waterworks Commission. I guess first I'll take note of our Wausau Waterworks members in attendance. It looks like we have a quorum, so we're good there.
Okay, and I'll call the Finance Committee meeting, Finance Committee portion of this meeting to order, noting that all of the finance members are present.
All right. Thank you. We're going to start with our joint items first. First up is our update on the water rate study. We do have Brian from Ellers here, but I'm not sure maybe who wants to kick us off first.
We should make sure he can hear us.
I see the camera turning on.
Oh, maybe?
Yep, I can hear you guys.
Oh, perfect.
Perfect.
We can hear you too. We just can't see you, but you know what? We'll take.
Oh, it's coming.
Now
There
we
he
see
is.
you.
There we go.
All right.
We're good.
Hello.
All right, so I did see that you have our presentation materials in your packet.
Yes.
So I'll kind of walk through those, and as is stated on your first agenda item, I'll walk through the water rate update. I'll take questions and comments during that, and then we can move to the financing plan. So with that, going beyond the title slide and identification of the water rate case section, the first slide kind of reads that the PSC did release what's called the revenue requirement. And essentially what that is they take the application that we filed, and that was filed December 21st of 2022 for a 64.5% revenue adjustment. And then they take and audit the utilities PSC annual reports, kind of consumption and customer count readings. They use that time to look and kind of confirm the receipt of revenues through those consumption levels, et cetera, and just kind of identify what are the costs of the system as updated from the last rate case and the needs of the system. So through that, they determined in their revenue requirement that it was now going to be a revenue adjustment of just over 63%. And two reasons that that's lower than the 64.5 that was applied for is that their rate of return is slightly lower by 0.1%. So that lowered some of the revenue needs, and as well as they did reduce the expense requested for O&M, and that was mostly due to what they refer to as outside services. So two relatively small adjustments to get to that 63.04% revenue adjustment, and running this through our cash flow model that we have for the city, this adjustment still does provide for the adequate income to support the utilities costs. So we would recommend and walk through this with the city that we're kind of required to respond in general acceptance with this revenue requirement, given this, the kind of almost immaterial but small nature of the adjustments. There was really no argument on our side, and so we did file the acceptance letter as that was due yesterday. But with that said, just kind of wanted to walk quickly through the next steps. Will be the PSC's cost of service and rate design, where they take those revenue requirements and distribute those across your rates and customer classes. So they look to make sure that those rates are equitable and fair to all customer classes. In this next process that typically takes 3 to 4 weeks, they'll release that cost of service and rate design. Then after that point, there will be the customer notice for the public hearing that will work with the city to distribute, and then they'll have the public hearing in which customers can come forth either through the virtual conference in which the PSC hosts this public hearing, or via web comment, or via actually mail as well. They'll take comments for a period of time in which they can make comments to this rate case specifically. And then after that point is implementation. So that takes about another month to 2 months. So I would see this being the rates implemented probably July 1 most likely. And therefore, we'd have more information to kind of present at that time to the outcome of the rate case. So are there any kind of questions or comments on that?
Anyone?
Does anyone on finance have questions about that? I have one, and we had once at the last meeting as this process kicked off, there was public discussion of the need for up to a 65% rate increase on the water side. That clearly got the public's attention, and there's been an awful lot of concern about that, especially within certain socioeconomic populations. So are we requesting that 65, or now 63, obviously to offset the cost of the plant and the operations, but assuming that our efforts to address PFAS, assuming that we can perhaps secure forgivable loans or alternative grants, financing options, whatever they may be, do we anticipate that we will still need that level, or is there any way that we see ourselves maybe at some point needing less than that 63% come July?
Sure. I would see that revenue requirement as still needed to this point, in as well as considerations for the future and final long-term investment for the GAC process for PFAS as well, in that this will obviously is kind of the stepping point for those investments as well. And then from the long-range cash flow model that was presented historically, I think that was late 2022. I believe early December was the meeting at the Utility Commission or Waterworks Commission meeting, that there may be a need, depending on future operating costs and as well as future decisions on the pilot payment, as right now that's frozen at a level. But if there's other decisions that would factor in for a need of any sort of future adjustments.
Okay, thank you for that. I know we have not only fixed the pilot payment, but we've also applied an awful lot of ARPA dollars to offset further borrowing in the utility for last year's and this year's infrastructure projects to kind of, I guess, slow that whole process down in terms of the needs. But yeah, if it looks like we're still going to need that amount, I think it's important for us to convey and for the rest of the council to convey when they're having public-facing conversations that, grants and financing notwithstanding, that I guess there needs to be some realization or understanding with the public that we may not be offsetting all or any of that 65% if it's operational need. So, Doug?
Yeah, so I believe back at, we did a committee of the whole to talk a little bit about this rate, I believe, and one of the topics was the pilot payment. And I thought we were going to take a deeper dive into that and see how is it structured, how do we arrive at it, can we do anything differently? I know we did a short-term 2-year curtailment of the increase, but it still remains a potential $2 million payment, and I think we need to keep that on the
Right.
docket.
I think what we should do, and we had planned to do, is put a pin in an analysis of that for a future finance meeting, but I think we definitely need to have that conversation now that we're to this point in the PSC process. I think it's a good idea, maybe at one of our upcoming meetings, to have that analysis, because we need to first understand the function of the pilot payment and then the pros and cons of adjusting it too far. I think that's important for us to understand before anybody makes a huge swing in either direction on that payment. Mary Ann?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's important to note that the rate study showed that frozen, I guess, indefinitely. So there was no understanding, or at least evaluation from the PSC side, that it was going to change in the near future. And there are costs that we know the utility is going to experience that also are not included in the study, such as they had their personnel study done, independent personnel study, that concluded that they actually needed to supplement the current workforce, and those additional positions were not included in the rate study. And we also have, lead service as a issue that's outstanding for the utility. Now, what would the PSC allow that to be incorporated into the rates? That's something that we'd have to talk to them about, but it definitely is something that's out there that is unfunded at this point.
Carol?
I know that, thank you, Alder Rasmussen, by the way, for your initial question, because that was going to be mine. I have heard from quite a few residents who, especially families with young children, who are really concerned about the increase in the rates. And so, that's why a number of people had asked about, okay, well, who is responsible for the PFAS? And I know we had the DNR, and this may not be the place to bring that up, but my takeaway from that was there's nothing in the near future,
Right.
no hope of that right now.
Sounds like it's very difficult to identify at this point, and even if we do, it's going to be sometime in the future, and in the meantime, we are needing to fund the solution, so.
Yeah.
um,
So those were the main people that I heard from, were families with young children that are already strapped, so it remains a concern.
I guess I would also add, the city of Wausau is a part of a program that folks can apply to for assistance, utility assistance. So if we want to send that out again to everybody, if that's helpful, we can do that. Brian, we see your hand up.
The one additional comment, I was going to make two, but you did speak to that, Mayor, is the customer assistance programs, and I can kind of send, there's state programs available, and we can send that website to city staff. But then the other comment, speaking to future operating costs, I just want to remind everyone too, in terms of how the PSC math works, is you actually can't recoup future costs. So let's say if you were to hire more staff January 1st of 2024, although we're kind of going for a rate adjustment mid-year 2023, those considerations cannot be made. They only allow for recovery of costs within a test year context. And so there's kind of a component of time there. And as well as for the pilot payment, you only get that test year recovery as well. So that's kind of why it's imperative to maybe one suggestion would be to kind of look at that annually as part of the budgeting process in terms of what we set that pilot payment to in the future.
Thank you. I think we're ready to keep moving. Thanks. Do we feel good about the rate study, and do we want to move on to GAC? Oh, yes, Commissioner Force.
I'd like to ask our speaker, you mentioned the analysis of the customer base, and I'm probably remiss in not knowing exactly what that is, but I wonder if you could define that a little further, and the question is, would that have any impact on the rate structure to various customer groups?
Sure. So in terms of, I'll speak to the rate structure first. You have to explicitly make changes to the rate structure in the context of your rate application and desired changes. So that should be kind of a pointed discussion. We did have some discussion in the meetings in fall and winter of 2022 as to changing the rate structure. And I believe it was determined to kind of wait for the next rate case so as to recoup the costs that the system is incurring now and through 2023, knowing that the PSC process actually will take longer as a result of requesting such changes. There's a significant component of data that the PSC likes to see, and that's kind of usage by rate block that can take typically around an extra 2 months and potentially longer to kind of go through. So we've discussed and investigated some of those opportunities, but knowing that there may be an opportunity to request that at a future date with the Public Service Commission and the need for the revenue adjustment as a result of the PFAS treatment, operating and capital expenses near coming, that it was determined to, kind of further investigate that at a later time. So that's kind of going through the rate structure component. In terms of the adjustment that the PSC makes now to the rate design or the study that they'll go through, is they basically acknowledge that customer classes use the water system differently. I mean, for example, the residential class has a higher max day use and max hour use because we, as a residential class, you tend to use that in the morning and a lot at night. So your demand ratio is different than, per se, a industrial class user who may be running a 24/7 operation, kind of consistently using water. Although their usage may be higher, their impact on the system may be slightly lower, given that the system is designed for those max hour, max day demand ratios.
And are we to a point where, we know that we've done some analysis here and that we're following a set process, but, forward facing, if we're having these conversations out in the community, it's difficult enough to get people to accept an operational need for a 65% increase, but given the future needs and knowing that those can't be taken into account in advance, do we have any assurance that we're not going to be back in this exact same boat in a year or two? I'd like to be able to give the community some assurance that if we're going to adjust the rate by 63 or 4% or whatever the PSC gives us, that in a year or two, we're not going to be back asking for another 35, because, at some point, that's a very difficult conversation to have with your community, given the fact that, and knowing that with regard to our PFAS spending, we are hoping to apply for financing sources that are in large part forgivable. So hopefully we wouldn't have to carry that debt for decades. Is there any, reassurance that we can give the community? Lots of folks tune into these meetings, that, we're not going to be in this same boat in 2 years and asking for another huge percentage.
Sure. And what I would say to that is the Eller's process for walking through a water rate study is not simply that, we let the PSC hand the documentation over. This commission or joint finance committee and utility commission can, we present our final report once the PSC's decision is in. So likely late June, maybe early July, you would be seeing another long-range cash flow analysis that would analyze, as a result of 10 years of projects, inclusive of the GAC project and the financing that you speak to be analyzed, and when we would see, eligibility for any of the windows of opportunity for rate adjustment that may be needed. So that answer will be quite clear, I would say, come late June, early July, and we would be making a presentation.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else have questions from finance on the rate study? Okay.
All right, it looks like we're ready for item number 2, discussion and possible action regarding interim financing process and schedule for granular activated carbon filtration system. I think that's also you, Brian.
Yep. If no city staff has any comments, I'll kind of get into that. So your packet, slide 4 of our materials, the Eller's materials, identifies kind of a title slide, interim financing for the GAC, and then slide 5 is the first slide there. But what slide 5 is a chart that was provided by Donahue in terms of their expectations for construction spending that they worked through with city staff in identifying the potential loan closing dates for this long-term capital investment. And what they've identified is that construction, you'd start to have kind of pay requests for this construction period from about July of 2023 through May of 2024, if you can kind of read that slide and that chart, and they've identified that window in terms of when interim financing would be needed, meaning that you're not closing on the state loan, which is that SFY, means state fiscal year 2024, until May of 2024. So that said, we have a gap in time until that's available. The reason we're using that, again, that program, is because there is the eligibility for the grant funding there. However, it does come with that time component. So there's a period of time in which we'll need about $17.5 million for interim financing. So this chart was kind of provided to depict why the interim financing is needed. On the next slide, that's labeled financing options. We walk through this need for interim financing is typically solved in what's called anticipation notes, which are short-term debt obligations of the city that are actually a special obligation, so not technically a revenue pledge of the system or a general obligation pledge of the irrevocable tax authority of the city, but rather basically a pledge that in the future the city will be incurring debt in order to pay back the anticipation notes. So given the time frame that we've walked through on the previous slide, this would need to be a 1-year maturity. We would help the city draft terms with the help of bond counsel as well, and then present that to the city as needed, and as well as present that to potential underwriters. And so you can take on these anticipation notes. They would work kind of no different than your other regular capital borrowing, in that at the point of closing, you would receive the monies and be able to earn interest. Right now, you would be able to earn favorable interest there, just kind of given where money markets are at and the statutory authority that the city has for various investment vehicles. That said, the city ultimately, in terms of our role as the municipal advisor, we do not solicit underwriters and say, work with this one and not that one. So we would provide a list of underwriters who have bid on similar transactions, and then the city is, should be choosing those underwriters in terms of who we distribute those terms to, and kind of think of it like a request for proposal. They're kind of no different from any other RFP, meaning that you're kind of sending this to those underwriters and saying, these are our needs, and then establish the time at which they would bid. So the next slide identifies kind of moving forward. We're looking, knowing that these are anticipation notes, and there's kind of this unique structure in that the program, that state program for the long-term financing, does request that your interest be due at maturity or the takeout of the long-term financing, and any interest that would be payable in the interim would not be eligible for reimbursement. So to provide that financial flexibility to the city, we would recommend that you have interest due at maturity so that that is program eligible to be reimbursed. You can look at an ability to draw. However, given that interest earnings discussion, we would recommend just kind of taking it out all at once. We work on a lot of similar transactions right now, given the amount of communities undertaking these utility projects through these state programs. And typically the underwriters prefer that takeout all at once, just to make it kind of cleaner on their end. But that said, that you could have the ability to draw, but we would recommend kind of that full takeout upon issuance. And then also it be a private placement there, meaning it's not a municipal security traded on the open market. The city, again, would be drafting the terms, and I reiterate to say that it's advantageous for the city to identify what are your needs and identify this group of underwriters that you're going to send it to. If these are kind of sent out openly. Typically, there's a lot of questions that can't really be answered in that sale process. So this is why we're recommending that process is generally kind of these unique structures of the financing package. So again, we'll provide a list of underwriters who have bid, and then as you'll see on the next slide, the city should be choosing those underwriters at a future meeting. So kind of moving forward on the next slide, the city would be approving the interim financing sale process and that distribution list or the list of underwriters at the May 8th meeting. And then on the following day, we would help the city disseminate that term sheet to the distribution list, so May 9th. And then we would request responses or bids by June 8th, and then the city would then award interim financing at that following meeting the week after, June 12th, with a close for June 29th to be in time for the money needs based on the project schedule that you saw a couple slides ago. And then beyond that, Donahue and the financing team, and that includes Ellers, your bond counsel, et cetera, would continue to work on the Safe Drinking Water Fund loan program up until closure. So ultimately, beyond the interim financing, just know that there are items that would need to be tackled in terms of getting that state program in place so that the grant money is available to the city, and we'll continue to work on that. So with that, I can kind of take questions on the sale process or interim financing.
I see a question emerging from Commissioner Robinson.
I had questions relative to the transactional cost, both in terms of what do you anticipate that the issuance cost for your services and bond counsel will be? What do you anticipate the projected borrowing rate or the interest rate charged to the city or the utility would be? And then what do you anticipate our ability to invest those funds would be, which is sort of material to whether it's a draw or upfront.
Sure. So we did run a few scenarios in terms of doing a draw schedule versus all at once. And there was the difference there in terms of interest costs was about $180,000, and the interest earnings was about $189,000. So dispersing all at once, you could cover the costs of instead of drawing and basically not investing, if that makes sense. And then in terms of the estimated costs of financing, I can't directly speak to bond counsel for the costs of their transaction, but for Ellers, we haven't charged above $18,000 for this for an anticipation note of this nature, so it would not be more than $18,000. I would imagine bond counsel would be in the same neighborhood, though, based on my experience with these, but I couldn't pinpoint what their costs for the anticipation note would be.
Did you follow up?
It would be presented, though, for the May 8th meeting.
So, a question for Mary Ann, do we have any other financial options that could reduce the transactional costs, such as the state on a short-term basis?
No, the state trust fund loan really isn't designed for these kinds of projects. And while they say they'll do water and sewer projects, they really don't. So we did explore that for some other projects that we had for water and sewer and found that it really wouldn't help us. And I know, you can get, right now, the LGIP is paying 4.54% in interest, and that, would be the easiest way. We could probably, improve our rate earnings through other, vehicles.
Okay, does anybody, Doug, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I'm wondering if is there a defined maturity date on these, and is there any risk associated with this closing date of the permanent loan moving out beyond what we have anticipated?
I can answer that. So in order to close on the state program, you would need to do that by June of 2024. So I, truly recommend a maturity date would not need to be beyond July 1 of 2024. So right now, that's the plan to have this mature no later than July 1. We could add time to that. However, you would be needing to reapply for the program to kind of get a later close date.
Well, we're far enough down the line with I think our applications to the state funds are already in. So, that creates a significant delay to reapply for future dates. So if we're confident in the financing schedule, I think is easier to manage than a construction schedule. So on the borrowing end, as long as we keep to our financing schedule as planned, and we make the votes that need to be made, and we sell the debt that needs to get sold, that's all processes that we can control. The construction and supply side is completely different, but if you go through the process and you have the money on hand, that really is the more important part as far as the anticipation note being refinanced timely or paid back timely. So, I think that is within our control. As long as we make the decisions that we need to make on the proper schedule, we're less likely to be delayed on the finance end than we would be on the actual build part. So, does anyone else from finance have any? Go ahead, Mary.
I did want to add, because of the level of this issue, we would not be bank qualified then for any issues in 2023. So just one other item.
Okay. And so with this item tonight, because we have it agendized for discussion and possible action, is it your goal that both bodies would vote to accept the process and the timeline and then move forward accordingly? Or do you not need us to act on this tonight?
I do think it would help if there's support from the two bodies to move this forward as planned. And certainly there's time too if you feel it's needed, for something in April as well, but just knowing that the presentation would likely be the same. You could, if you're in agreement with the schedule and the process, to move it forward as slated, kind of in terms of schedule and process, and the schedule is laid out on slide 8.
I think to have us to stay on track, there's value in having us act if we're comfortable in acting. So is there a motion within the Finance Committee to accept this process and the timeline and direct staff to continue to work with Ellers and the water utility to adhere to the schedule?
The other thing is, based on the timeline, I think for bidding, we wouldn't really be able to enter into a contract unless we knew that there was going to be a financing mechanism to pay for it. So I think, that's another reason why we've got the timetable set up. If we do want to get going on that project, we really, basically need to stay within the timetable that we've established.
Well, and the problem we have with delaying the implementation of the GAC solution is that the longer we delay, the more times we will be asked to change and pay for the change of the anion resin at the plant, which is super expensive. And so, we may already be looking at a couple cycles of that just to maintain confidence in the water supply. So, with that, do we have a motion within the Finance Committee? Sarah? Motion to approve the schedule and the process and direct staff to move forward. Is there a second? Second by Lukens. Further discussion from Finance? Go ahead, Doug.
I guess just to speak to what Mary Ann said there is so before you issue this anticipation, you will know that we're guaranteed on the closing, so we're not caught having to pay this back and not have a solution.
You're talking about with the DOA?
Right.
Boy, I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Keith? my understanding of your question, Doug, is will we know that we actually have funding from the DOA through the Safe Drinking Water program prior to issuing these interim notes or bonds, whatever?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so the funding list for the state fiscal year 2024, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I believe comes out in fall each year. So there would be a time lag in terms of knowing that you're making the list. The one thing that I would feel reassured of is the temporary solution, how that's scored, and knowing how PFAS in general will be scored in terms of project need compared against other projects, and that the emerging contaminants has its own separate bucket of money from the bipartisan infrastructure law. I would feel assured there in terms of where you would land on the funding list, but truly that date is in the fall of 2023. I apologize. 2023, but it's in the fall each year for the year upcoming.
And given the fact that it is, a competitive grant fund, obviously, the fact that our applications are already in and that we're on the front end of the application cycle versus other communities that are going to end up in the same boat. I mean, essentially, we're a couple years ahead of other places in Wisconsin with the PFAS solution. I mean, there's communities that haven't even tested yet, let alone find it and fix it. So, hopefully we're on the front end of that pot of money, and it won't be expended before we, I think there could be a point where communities that are late to the table on this, the fund could be expended before they get there. And so there's an advantage to us to be on the front end. So additional comments from finance? Okay, if not, we have a motion and a second then to approve the timeline and the process and direct staff to pursue. With that, members of finance signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed signify by saying no. None are opposed. That motion carries.
All right, so we'll go ahead and take this note on behalf of the utility. Do I have a motion to approve the interim financing process and schedule for the granular activated carbon filtration system? Looks like I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Robinson. Is there any discussion? Okay, all of those in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you. We are moving on to item number 3, discussion and possible action on granular activated carbon construction schedule and budget modification. Don't know who wants to take a stab at that.
Do you want to talk about the bid schedule, Eric?
So right now, we have the system designed. It's under final review right now, some quality control. Our staff is taking a look at some of the operations of it and trying to get some more information, but we'll be ready to bid in the next few weeks. And so really, we'll probably have it out for 30 to 40 days from when we begin bidding and advertising that project. We will open bids. We'll probably take 2 to 3 weeks to review the bids, go over the costs and schedules, come back for a decision on that bid schedule, and then depending on where we are with the financing, bids are usually available for 30 to 60 days. So we should be within that window when financing becomes available and we can execute that contract to move forward.
Any questions or comments from this body?
And with this item, we're requesting a budget mod. Is that to the 2022 budget or 23 budget for?
Just the project itself.
To get to insert the funds that we're borrowing and then expend them?
Yes.
Okay, just so we're clear on what that is. It's not existing tax revenue, it's the new funding coming in and then the use of it.
Right.
Anybody from finance have questions on that schedule at all? Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. So 30, 60 days after you select, so you're talking June, July?
Yeah, we would anticipate construction beginning in early July.
Okay.
Okay. Additional comment from finance? And so I assume that you would be looking for a motion from us to approve the schedule and the budget mod to intake the funds when they're received and then expend them accordingly. Right?
Yeah, and we can bring that budget mod in May with the financing, because we'll have, a good idea, or, pretty good idea of what the project is gonna cost now that it's designed. And
Okay,
it's
so do you
whatnot.
want action on it tonight or to wait?
I think we can wait.
Okay, so we can defer action on that until we know a little more?
Do we feel good from this body? I see nods from the utility commission as well.
Finance is nodding too, so I think we've done a decent presentation if everyone feels
Thank you.
comfortable.
Okay, with that, I guess we are done with the utility stuff. Oh, Mr. Robinson.
I'd just like to take an opportunity to extend an invitation to the members of the council and the commission on April 2nd. Wisconsin Green Fire, along with the Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Towns Association, and other groups, is hosting a PFAS seminar in Wausau at the Jefferson Street Inn. It'll be free, beginning at 9:30 till approximately 3:30. We'll send you some other information, but it's a good intro of what the status of PFAS are from regulatory and treatment and other perspectives.
Will it be available on live stream as well, so people can watch it if they can't get there?
We are working on that. We're trying Wisconsin Eye. We're looking at Wisconsin Eye
Okay.
doing it, and we've had some discussions with public access
Awesome.
as well. So we're looking at recording it and making it available.
Okay, good to know.
All right, with that, I would entertain a motion for the utility commission to adjourn. I have a motion by Commissioner Robinson and a second by Alder Herbst. Any discussion? All right, all of those in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Oh,
May 2nd.
May 2nd, yeah.
Oh, May 2nd, okay.
May 2nd, not
I was
April
going to ask
2nd, I'm
you,
sorry.
May. We're good. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your finance.
Okay, with that, finance will continue. We have 5 items left, so we're not yet done, but item number 4 on our finance agenda is the minutes of our previous meeting from 3/14 of '23, copies of which are in the packets. Does anyone have any revisions or amendments they want to the minutes? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. Motion from Denny, is there a second? Second by Watson. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? None are opposed, the minutes are approved. Item number 5 is discussion and possible action regarding ARPA funding requests and related budget modification. We have this item every month, but you'll remember that last week we ranked 2 items for consideration at this meeting. The first one was City Hall security improvements. We had a presentation from the staff and from the mayor for some needs that they have at City Hall to prevent wide open access to most of the building within the department. So we ranked that project. And then also a increase in funding for previously approved testing, but this for corrosion control treatment optimization study. So you've got the ranking sheets there. The City Hall security improvement ranked at 47.8. Corrosion control ranked at 63, which is where a lot of projects have been ranking. I guess the only thing I would offer on the security improvements is that when I was scoring it, it occurred to me that there are other funding mechanisms for that if we opt to not use ARPA. Obviously, there is, we don't know yet what the 2022 surplus looks like, if any. We also don't know what would be yielded out of the 2024 CIP. Obviously, that project could come under there as well, depending on, how much ARPA we have left, which is, I think, just under 2 million, right? And, what we wish to use it for in terms of public-facing projects. So we have that. I guess, how do you guys think about where these things scored? Let's go Carol and then Michael.
Oh, I can go first? Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Yeah, I'm kind of under the same agreement as that. I had a hard time scoring the City Hall security improvements. I know this came to CIP maybe 5 years ago. We talked about it then, and I don't recall seeing it come to CIP any of the terms since then. So it doesn't. The goal of ARPA, those ARPA funds, is for broad-based transformative change or effect into the city, and it's hard to shoehorn that the security changes of this building into something transformative for the greater good of the city of Wausau. So I definitely see the need for it. I think it's important thing we need, but I just feel that, ARPA is really not the mechanism for that. Corrosion control, I think that's something we need to, we need to keep moving forward on. We've got a world-class water system. We're going to need to make some changes to how we're going to handle our, to make sure that the delivery is going to be, of the water is going to be safe, safe for PFAS, but also safe for lead, and that includes corrosion control. So that I feel that this second program is very important towards that.
Carol?
Thank you. Since I was a high scorer on both of them, I'll do the lead study first. I think that is extremely important. So I think ARPA is a good use, for financing for that. The City Hall security improvements, I have been doing drills for years in the schools, and we had one that was accidental, but it wasn't a drill, okay? And I see how that impacts students. So if there are other funds to use for it, then either way, I think this is an emergency. I do. There was just a school shooting in Nashville, yesterday, today?
Yesterday.
This is happening more and more. And I guess the way that I looked at it, I understand the argument that, it's not for the broader community, but in some ways it is. This is our city government. And so, things can happen in a flash. And so anyway, maybe because I work in the school system and I have to do these drills twice a year, I think it's extremely important. And if all the schools have security and the courthouse has security and medical places have security, I think our city government, and the workers deserve to be able to work and feel safe. So is there, another option? I would be happy if there's another option to do it not out of ARPA, but I think it needs to be done. It needs to be a priority.
I do agree it needs to happen. I think that, the altercation that they had up on the third floor with the, guns out person under the table situation, I think that really was kind of what tore it, not to mention that, folks have been able to get in and hide in the basement and all kinds of things. So, that's significant. I think people do need to feel safe in their workplace, and it's a fair assessment that not everyone that comes to City Hall to do business with their government necessarily leaves happy. And so whether that's for court, or whether it's for one of our meetings where they want to fight about things, or whether it's for a permit that doesn't get approved or a license that doesn't get approved, we've all seen people storm out of here and not necessarily in the best state. So I too agree that it's a super important project. I guess I'm looking for alternatives on the fund source for that. Do we know, I know we were a few weeks away from settling the 2022 year end. Do we know, are we closer to where we?
I would most likely have better information at the next meeting. Obviously, with the Workday implementation, that is really, kind of stressed. And we're down an accountant right now too, and we have been for 3 months. Has really put a lot of pressure on the staff. So I don't have information on year end at this point.
Because the two things that we know we put a pin in for that, well, one of them was that ambulance where we only bought the one. And this very well could be another one once we know how we fared last year. Because it really, in the grand scheme of things we spend money on, it's not really that expensive. But if there's an alternative fund source, that's valuable to us to know, I think. Mayor?
Yeah, I guess for me, I don't care where the funds come from, but it is a priority for me and for the folks that work here at City Hall. We've had a couple of people arrested, just from my office, and I'll tell you, I had nightmares for 2 years thinking about that. It took me going to a literal war zone. I'm trying not to get emotional here, to stop having nightmares about it. And so that moment at the end of the December was really scary for people. You could hear it. They didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
There are security reports from the last 2 administrations. They're not public, obviously, but if that's something that you'd like to take a look and peruse through, they've only become more important and emergent. So I hope that this is prioritized for the sake of city staff here and any residents that are visiting us. I think it's important that we have a safe environment and people aren't afraid.
Okay. I do think that it's definitely not appropriate to air the weaknesses of this building in public, in a public forum or in a meeting packet, but I would invite anybody that's interested in the outcome of all those surveys to visit the mayor's office one-on-one and review them with her. I did see them under the last administration, and I was surprised at how easy it was for some of those things to take place. So that's all I'll say about that. But I guess we have the option to, if Mary Ann will know a little more about year end in 2 weeks, we could put a pin in the security thing until we know that. Obviously CIP basically puts it off a year, because if you go to the 2024 CIP, you're really not doing anything until at least January. So, that really does kick it down the road if we go to CIP. But if we have surplus dollars that we could access from last year, that would move them forward almost immediately, because that money's here. So what do you guys think about that? Michael?
Yeah, in putting a pin in this, did we, when we talked about the upgrades to the council chambers here, the AV upgrades, were we considering that for surplus funds too, or did we?
That was one of the other things I think we put the pin in, but we also mentioned to Jerry about CIP, so.
We kicked that down to CIP again.
We did.
I would rather, because if we've got surplus funds available, I'd rather just see, if it's possible to fund the med and to fund these security upgrades out of that, and use ARPA funds for stuff that's better suited for
A larger function?
a larger community kind of impact.
I tend to agree, and I think if the choice had to be made between the security of this building and the IT function of this chamber, it's the security all day long. So if we want to hold on that until we know at our next meeting where we're going to come out, that's helpful for us to know. What do you guys think on the corrosion control? That project's already kind of underway, so do we move that forward? Michael, go ahead.
I'm good with moving that forward.
Okay. Carol's nodding as well. Do we have a motion to move that one forward and fund it with ARPA? Motion by Martins, is there a second? Second by Denny. Further discussion? Doug, go ahead.
Well, if this is an opportunity to just talk to the security piece, there's probably things we could do right now that don't cost us very much at all. Every office up here has a door with a lock on it. I visit Green Bay here recently. There's a security entrance for the mayor's office, but the access to chambers, the access to a lot of the public areas is less controlled, if you will. The Brown County courthouse, beautiful architectural structure with a rotunda similar to what we see down in Madison, completely open access to the public. They do restrict access to one door, but I think we have to weigh that with. I guess let's look at the financial part of it first, and I can get into the philosophical part of it later. I agree with Mike that we shouldn't be spending ARPA money on this, but if it is an emergency, let's look at some low-cost efforts right now. We can lock that door right upstairs and limit access. We can lock individual doors. So let's not, just a couple of days ago, we just celebrated the anniversary, or not celebrated, but we had the anniversary of the tragic death of 4 people, 2 in a bank, 1 in a law firm, and 1 police officer in the course of duty. So, this stuff does happen out there. Is it more prevalent in the city hall than it is in banks, in law firms, elsewhere? I don't know the answer to that, but if it's an emergency and we think it is, let's work the CIP. Let's take some actions that we can right now and finance this correctly. But I would agree to approving the corrosion treatment and defer on the security until we find a better.
So we know a little more?
Right.
Sure.
Oh, I was going to suggest an alternative. So you could further the budget modification to council at their next meeting, and we could set the funding source at our next meeting on the 11th. So it would basically be considered by council, on the 11th with the funding source inserted prior to the meeting.
We haven't decided, well, I guess, have we decided that if there is no alternative source, are we willing to use ARPA? I think if we're going to move it forward, we have to be prepared for the outcome to be, this was a request for ARPA. So, I mean, yes, we want an alternative fund source, but if we forward it to council with the fund source open, we have to be willing to recognize that that source could be surplus or ARPA. So, if you'd like to use something besides ARPA and not ARPA, that's fine, but if push came to shove and we need ARPA, are we good with that? Deputy Chief Barnes, welcome.
I promised Chief Bliven, who wished he could be here, I think he's on a beach right now, but I promised him that I'd come up and speak to this. In the entire time I've been a police officer, every 2 or 3 years, we have staff that we send to training to do risk assessment and to do facility surveys. Those surveys for the last 20 years have indicated that we have safety and security risks at City Hall. Over the period of that time, we have responded to this location. You have staff that work incredibly long hours. We know that Mary Ann wanders the hallways here sometimes at 10 and 11 o'clock at night. Yes. We know that we have had people who have been living inside City Hall and sitting in bathrooms and have had access to locations here. Every single one of those professionally written assessments have indicated the importance to expedite fixing the physical security of this facility. And I would strongly encourage you, I would agree with the mayor, I don't care how you pay for it, but when we see changes at other similar locations throughout this city, the courthouse, for example, generally speaking, something bad happens and then it becomes an emergency. And our hope is that nothing bad needs to happen here. It has come close, that we can get these changes implemented to make this a safe place for people to work. That's our responsibility. That's all of our responsibilities together. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Carol?
Thank you for your input. I guess something else I wanted to add. A question. If there wasn't anything else right now, could we use ARPA and then fund it, like repay that with something else, or no? You know what I mean? If because of the
repay
busyness.
the ARPA, you mean?
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
think you could because, for example, you authorized the drinking fountains, and then we chose not to fund those out of ARPA.
Right, so we put that money back in the pot for other things.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think, as time marches on, some of these projects are going to say they didn't spend all of the funds, so.
We'd be able to scoop up the savings and get more done
and
with.
reallocate.
Sure.
well, thank you.
Especially because it's coming out, it would come out of that category revenue loss for government services where we have a lot of wiggle room as far as
Reporting.
rules and, requirements.
Thank you for that. So I would like to, the example of you being here at night. This may not be politically correct, okay? And I mean it most respectfully, but as a woman, there is a different, I don't want to say a different threat, because women and men are both, can both be threatened, but I'm going to say that sometimes I think the awareness of safety issues is maybe more kind of profound for women in general, I'm speaking, okay? And so that, I'll just say, I've worked at a lot of different places. I would not want to be here, by myself late at night if, with the security risks. And even, I appreciate the locking doors, because we have to keep our doors locked at school, our classroom doors, all the time. And it is such a pain. I hate it, but we have to. So not only the outside doors, the inside doors. And if the doors here are glass, that someone has a gun. So I don't mean, I'm not like a fear-based person, but I've learned with this, with, you know, everything that we've been through, I don't want our city staff to have to be at risk in that way.
Well, and the fact that the designs we saw have a bulletproof component, which is helpful. And, you know, that's something that, you know, sadly in this day and age, a person has to be mindful of. But I, for one, am good with, if there was no other fund source and it had to be ARPA, I'd be okay with that. But I'd like to try other things first, I guess is where I come down on it. So if you guys would like to move both projects forward with the understanding that the security improvements, that we want an effort to be made before this gets to council to find an alternative fund source, hopefully surplus. What do you guys think?
I'll amend my motion to move both projects forward and the City Hall security, leave the funding source open.
Okay. Doug, are you
I
amenable
would
to that as a
oppose that.
second?
No, I won't, because if this is an emergency, let's find those funds and let's put it through the correct process. What we're trying to do here is use the ARPA as a crutch, and then we'll have no incentive to properly fund this. So let's not use ARPA for its unintended purposes to crutch us to what we think might be a good solution here. I mean, this is an emergency apparently because it's just come to us. I've never seen it before. Philosophically, I agree. We have some holes in our security. We need to address it. Right now, we're just talking about the financial part of it. If this is an emergency, we can find the funds. Running it through ARPA is just, it's taking the lazy way out.
Sarah? Oh, Carol, then Sarah.
Can I one more time? Okay.
Sure.
I disagree because she just said that they are so overloaded right now with the changeover. And so I think if we're able to pay that back, and so I just want to say, I would rather have it come from somewhere else too. I'm all for that. I just rated it so high because I think it needs to be done ASAP. So if we have to wait to find another funding source, let's also keep in mind that city staff are already short down an accountant and they are overloaded. So that's why I brought up the using ARPA and then repaying back. That's the reason. Thank you.
Well, and that does give some wiggle room for that alternative fund source to show itself before the project wraps up, but maybe doesn't necessarily have to be ready in 2 weeks. So I guess, so we had Michael made an amendment to the motion to move both projects forward with the recognition that we would like to look for a alternative fund source on the security improvements, but move both to the council for approval. Now, were you opposing that as a did you want to withdraw your second then, Doug? You
Well,
can
I
if-
think I seconded the motion to advance corrosion control treatment optimization study. I mean, are we going to vote on them separately or together?
We could vote on them separately. Okay,
Let's vote on them separately.
Okay, so let's go with the original motion, which was to move corrosion control treatment optimization forward, and then we'll come back to the security issue and take a separate motion. So with that, with a motion and a second on the floor to move forward corrosion control, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, so that passes. So then if we step back to the security improvements, do we have a motion to also move that forward with the understanding that we are interested in an alternative fund source other than ARPA? Motion by Lukens, is there a second by Watson? Further discussion? Michael?
Well, let Sarah go first, and I'll speak.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I mean, I know it's not maybe hugely impactful on the entire community, but I mean, this is our building as a community. We need, and we're all going to be in this building at some point, and it's going to protect our citizens as well. And I don't know, I think having that open, I understand it may feel like you have more of access to your government, but I think it's just the day and age we're in that those added pieces need to happen. So I'm more than willing to pass it on through, so.
Yep, and well, and the concerns certainly aren't new. I mean, I don't know, I've been around 15 years, and I've been hearing them for probably 8 of the 15. So there's been some pretty scary stuff that goes on, so, including in this chamber. So That said, with a motion and a second on the floor. Michael, go ahead,
Oh, yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of clarify my remarks and the reason why I wanted to amend my motion previously. Because, I do have a problem with security when security becomes security theater, and we've seen that in the last 20 years in a lot of places where it looks like it's solving a problem, but it isn't. And so I always am concerned about increasing the security and access to a building which is supposed to be the people's building, and let the people, be in and be able to interface with their local government. But we have had issues, and I thank you, Alder Lukens, for your for what you said, you're aware, your situational awareness, and I feel like I'm usually pretty situationally aware of, when I come into an environment, where people think, places where security, they think security is important and where it's not important, and there are deficiencies in this building, and I think, if it's a common sense approach, if it helps, if it doesn't, hinder access in a negative way, like you can still, you're still able to interface with customer service, et cetera, and able to do your business about City Hall, but strengthens the parts that it is where security is important, then we need to move forward on it. And leaving the funding source open gives us that ability to use the best type of funding it is to get to where we need to be to make the employees safe and to keep our community safe.
Sure. Okay, Sarah?
Just one last ask, I guess. I'm assuming there is like an emergency, like Carol said, we have a first-person shooter plan, and I'm assuming there's a similar plan for City Hall. And do you do practices? No.
Well,
Okay, can
there's
that-
been training and drills in the
Yeah,
past, but
we-
not consistently,
And we
right?
have panic buttons.
Okay, I think alongside of this, I think that needs to be, I don't know, practiced and
Okay.
put into effect. So maybe
Yep.
just, this is and do a couple drills. a
In
year. I
addition
think
with
it's
it, some training would be
yeah,
helpful. I
yeah.
think that we could
And
request that of HR.
Cool.
So, Carol?
One last comment, I promise. So I just want to reemphasize that I too would like to see this come from another funding source other than ARPA, if at all possible. Thank you. And this is not, I don't mean for this to come across as like some emotional response. It's just logical from experience. And like I said, having been in a situation, was in summer school where the security company was checking the alarms and flipped a switch, and so no one knew. And what was really amazing is seeing the students just hop into action. We were very impressed. So I think, it saddens me that this is the state that it's come to.
Mm-hmm.
I think politics have not helped that. It's sad. It's sad that this is a state of our, the state of our state, because I too agree with Alder Martins about, it being the people's house. But I guess it's just, again, from the flip side of it, we just had this drill, and none of us look forward to it at school. But it occurred to me when we just had it, like 2 weeks ago, that in some ways, maybe it's not a bad thing for the students either, because it's about being prepared. We hear about things on airplanes, in buildings, wherever. And so in a way, it's about self-defense. And I agree. Thank you, Alder Watson, for bringing that up, because I wholeheartedly support that.
Mm-hmm.
Having an action, having a drill.
Yeah.
It's just about being prepared, and that never hurts. So, thank
Agreed.
you.
Okay. So with that, we've got a motion and a second on the floor then to move that project forward as well. Members in favor? Doug, go ahead.
Just for the record, I'm not opposing security in this building. I think there's a lot of things that I recognize that we could do better. We could have badges, we could have passes. I've walked in to get my mail when I first got elected. Most people didn't know who I was, but I was able to walk back like I knew what I was doing. I mean, I think, we can address that, and I hate to get wrapped around the axle on a process, but this is a process, and it's an emergency now authorization for ARPA funds, and I think there's precedent. It just doesn't feel right that we're running this through ARPA in an emergency situation when, as Mike said, it's been on the agenda for 5 years. It should have been in the CIP. It can be in the CIP. If it is an emergency, let's have a meeting on where we can find that funding, and the council then can approve it.
Well, and the hope is that by the time we get to council, which is roughly 2 to 4 weeks, we will hopefully have an alternative source. So we can certainly look for that.
And, I appreciate the goal to really spend our ARPA dollars wisely, but when you look at the classifications that the federal government gave, spending on government services and the examples that are outlined, construction of government buildings is one of the main categories. So, and we know that many communities have invested ARPA funds on improvements to their buildings and on technology improvements to their buildings so that they can engage with their citizens remotely. I don't think that those were foolish submissions, and I do think that they do fall within the major guidelines that the federal government established.
Sure. Well, and it is clear and obvious, I think, to any of us that have been here, that threats to government and government facilities are no joke. So,
Can I respond to that? I didn't classify this as a foolish submission,
Okay.
but an inappropriate route. And if it is an emergency, there's a lot of things that we're already overlooking. We could be addressing immediately, and we should be. So that's my only reason for not supporting it in this manner.
okay. Well, let's go to the vote. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
No.
Okay, so we'll record one opposed, and that item will move ahead. Item number 6 is discussion and possible action on a budget modification for 4th of July community fireworks proposal. You see the materials in your packet, comes down from the mayor's office, just looking to collaborate with our neighbors on one large fireworks display at the airport, which has been, we've kind of been hoping for a number of years because Marathon Park is so weather dependent. If you would get burning embers and something comes down either on a nearby home or in those trees, they've had to cancel so many times for wind. And that's never been a problem at the airport, even when we've had the balloon rally shows down there for the fireworks. So you have that item in front of you. Obviously, our neighboring communities are considering it as well, but they're looking for a budget mod to collaborate on that effort. Now, Jean from the mayor's office is with us if you have questions for her about the event. But if not, I would take a motion to approve the event, or do you have questions for Jean? Doug, go ahead.
Do we have commitment from the area communities that we've invited?
Yes, the other 4 communities have already voted yes.
Okay. That helps.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve? Motion from Watson, is there a second? Second by Martins, further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. Those are the fund policy decisions. Okay. Discussion and possible action on production agreement between Marathon County and City of Wausau. This renews an existing agreement between public access to record and televise county board meetings. So this is something that we've had for a period of time, and they wish to renew. Does anyone have questions about this at all? If not, is there a motion to approve? Motion by Lukens, is there a second? Second by Watson. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. And the last item is item number 8, discussion and possible action on memorandum of understanding between Marathon County, North Central Healthcare, and Metro Ride for specialized transportation assistance. And this also is an arrangement they've had for a while where they provide non-emergency transport for those facilities under contract. Does anyone have any questions on that item? If not, is there a motion to approve?
I move to
Motion-
approve.
Motion by Denny, do we have a second? Second by Martins, further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye
Aye.
opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries as well, which brings us to the end of our agenda, so I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion from Watson, is there a second? Second from Denny, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? No one's ever opposed to that, we'll stand adjourned, and then Common Council will start in this chamber at 6:30. Thanks, everyone.